Imagine your career as a ladder, leaning against the wall of success. You might be forgiven for thinking then that the only way to achieve would be by climbing up. But what would you risk doing differently if I told you that one of the top 5 regrets of the dying was working too hard? Might you reconsider your current definition of success? In a key moment, a single risky moment, I positively disrupted the entire course of my career by stepping off that ladder altogether. Having said that, it landed me on death row. I'd been working as a criminal barrister for around 8 years when the adventurer in me decided to sign up for a voluntary human rights project in Jamaica. Colleagues were questioning why on earth I'd want to go off to Jamaica to do anything unpaid, leaving a busy court practice behind. I wonder if any of you have had that, where a great opportunity presents itself and yet people around you are doing their best to put you off. Well, what about your own internal doubt? Because I, for one, was feeling pretty scared, not only stepping off the ladder, but also going somewhere completely unknown to me. Never mind Kingston, the then murder capital of the world. I soon settled into the role, though, finding the familiar in working with defence attorneys, but also experiencing the entirely new. Because if these clients were convicted, they would face the death penalty. The modern Crown Courts of home were a world away from the dark, dank, downtown courtroom where I saw Barrington, not his real name, convicted of capital murder after trial. It was surreal, like the movies. The judge put on a black cap and she said, "You are sentenced to death." It was becoming more like a horror film because in 1965, the death penalty was abolished in England. And in this particular case, there had been an awful miscarriage of justice. Barrington was, in fact, innocent. And he was carted off to death row to await execution for crimes that he did not commit. Barrington was living under a cloud of fear. Fellow inmates made it their business to harass and intimidate him, and in fact, on one occasion, set about him with makeshift weapons and stabbed him 23 times all over his body. He needed life-saving treatment to survive. On the day that he was due to be discharged from hospital back to the prison, I had an appointment to visit him and discuss his welfare, but also his appeal. When I arrived, though, guards told me he wasn't back, and no one seemed to have any real clue when he would be. Unfortunately, I had a flight to catch back to the UK that afternoon, and so I didn't have the luxury of time. I was really torn and had to make the horrible decision to leave. As I was walking away from the prison, an ambulance drove past me. My attention was only drawn to it, though, by a load of banging coming from the back of it. Next, I heard a scream for help. It was a familiar voice. "Help, Nikki!" It was Barrington. Risking the flight, I returned to the sweltering prison and waited for a sight I will never forget. Barrington coming towards me, bandages all over his body, including one right across one eye, scanning all around him with the other, and ashen through fear. Can you imagine the terror? Being returned to the very place where a serious attempt had been made on your life, but with no guarantee whatsoever of your personal safety. It was when he grabbed me by the hand and said, "You've got to help me," that I felt utterly overwhelmed. I had to engage my game face, something I'd become frighteningly good at over the years. "I'll do what I can," I heard myself say, not truly knowing in that moment what on earth that would be. It was the start of a long journey, helping on the appeal from both the UK and indeed by returning to Jamaica over the next 3 or so years, and often over those times distracting myself, wondering whether that innocent man would ultimately be condemned to death. And yet, on my return, there was an expectation that I would just pick up my usual court practice, pick up where I left off, and soon I found myself back on the ladder, heading back up. But after such an intense experience, something didn't feel right, something had changed. I'd started to wonder whether or not I was on the right ladder. And I wonder whether any of you have had that, those moments in your career where you've wondered where you're headed. In fact, having had the opportunity to step off the ladder altogether and experience these things beyond it, I was starting to wonder whether my ladder was even against the right wall. I knew I had to do something to positively disrupt the status quo, because this wasn't the first time that I'd queried that upward climb. Like the time when I had been with the first and only female partner of a law firm, celebrating her successes and looking for inspirational insights into how she'd achieved such heady heights. How could she be a role model to the younger generations coming up through the ranks? When I asked her what it had taken for her to climb her ladder of success and how she got to the top, what she said really struck me. She said she'd had to think and act like a man. It got me thinking how much pressure there was to keep up the act, and how on occasion that pressure has the power to floor us, just as it did to me when this picture was taken of my baby daughter. 8 months old at the time, so poorly she was being helped to breathe by hospital tubes. And where was I? Stuck on the ladder. Partway through a trial, client depending on me, game face engaged. Not wanting the professional mask or barrister wig to slip, I didn't feel at liberty to say anything to the judge, and despite instinctively knowing what was the right thing to do, I continued with the case. The parents amongst you might realise why I look back on this picture now with a deep sense of shame, regret and guilt. And I wonder, is this the status quo that we want to preserve? Especially as women, suppressing our true selves to fit, fixing our game faces, imprisoning ourselves behind self-imposed bars, to be role models, to prove to others that it can be done. And to do otherwise is somehow to let ourselves down. Men too, with each step on the rung of the corporate ladder, instead of enjoying the journey, feeling trapped and asking, what more? What next? How much further? How many of us feel that we carry on blindly up that ladder, unfulfilled, or in jobs that we dislike, following notions of success that we haven't truly spent time to define. How can we define success our way? Well, I want to share with you my 3 strategies for positively disrupting the traditional career ladder. Firstly, I invite you to poke the sacred cow. And by that I mean, see the status quo for what it is. Go with it, absolutely, if it's right for you. But if it isn't, then find the freedom to challenge it. The ladder's been with us for well over a century, long before women could ever become lawyers, and where important indicators of success have been money, status, and power. All traditionally masculine concepts. In more recent years, women have been encouraged to lean in to this male, military-style hierarchy, the Sheryl Sandberg approach to success. But isn't it time that we thought that it's the system that needs fixing, not the people within it? What would happen if we rewarded other leadership qualities, collaboration, compassion, courage? And on an organisational level too. We've all just lived through the perfect example. Before COVID, many organisations resisted, even advocated against, flexible remote working. And yet it's only going to take in a global pandemic, hasn't it, for us all to see how quickly the world can adapt to change. Working from home is becoming the norm, and many organisations are preferring the hybrid working model. So however uncomfortable it may make us feel, don't accept that change isn't possible. Secondly, ignore the naysayers. So important to find the confidence to step off that ladder. People will challenge your decisions, but ignore them. If I'd listened to the doubters, I wouldn't have sacrificed a few months' income to go to Jamaica. Unlikely that years later I wouldn't have started my own business, and certainly wouldn't have found the inspiration to write my first book. Because that was the gift that Barrington gave to me when on a subsequent visit he said to me, "You should write a book about this." So now I call myself coach, speaker, and author too. I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying that we can define success our way. But remember that this advice also applies to ourselves. Recognise when that naysayer is you. Challenge your inner critic, acknowledge your own fear, and find the courage to positively disrupt what's gone before. Finally, lean out from the ladder. I encourage you to reassess that climb up and open yourselves to experiences that shape you well beyond the ladder. Because having leant out from my career on the 876th day that Barrington waited on death row, and I know that because I counted them, he found out that his appeal was granted. Barrington was set free. His waking nightmare coming to an end was the helper's high of a lifetime. But it was also the catalyst for so much more. For me, finding my own very different sort of freedom to define my career my way. So I wonder if any of you are sitting here now seeing a few internal bars and wondering, well, where am I going to find a new perspective? Well, whether it's training for a half marathon, getting involved in a community project, learning a new skill, delivering the next TEDxDoncaster talk, then whatever or wherever it may be, I encourage you to look beyond that ladder. Look around as well as up. Lean out. Don't always lean in. And step off the ladder. Because imagine, you may even see to a different wall. So having shared with you my 3 strategies to positively disrupt the traditional career ladder, let me leave you with one last question. What will you risk doing differently to find the freedom to create your own future beyond the ladder that you are currently on? Thank you. Thank you.